Hello and welcome to today's program on how do you embrace change for yourself and your organization to navigate in these times of pandemic and uncertainty. My name is Ethan Chazin. I am a New York-based executive empowerment and organizational transformation coach. I want to dive right into today's critically important program that leads to direct personal and organizational survival. So everyone knows that not even all change is good or even necessary, but in a world that is constantly changing, it's to each and every one of our own advantage to learn how to adapt to and enjoy something better. Words from Ken Blanchard. So that'll set the framework for today's program. So first of all, let me just explain. Personal and organizational leadership isn't some random thing, and it isn't about individual characteristics. It's how a leader makes other people feel. And right now, in these times of stress, fear, and uncertainty, true, meaningful leadership is more valuable than ever before. So, in terms of living through and navigating a course in today's global pandemic, the future's scary, right? And it's uncertain. So, your followers, your employees, your customers, need reassurance from you because they are, all of us, fearful of an unknown future. So what does that mean? We know that people won't change a minute before they're ready to. That's what we understand as the baseline. For you wanting to, or perhaps having to, consider fundamental transformation, not just for success, but for your and your organization's very survival. So what is it that an organization can change? What are some things within its control? Its leadership structure, certainly its short and long-term business strategy, its internal way of operating, it's through its policies and procedures, and its culture. A culture, when people talk about it, may mean two entirely different things. A culture can be formal, meaning what the organization wishes or aspires its culture to be like. It's aspirational. It can be what its senior leadership team or its founding partners say about itself, but that may or may not have very much basis in reality. No. The more formative culture is the informal culture. It's what it's like to exist in and interact with that organization. The informal culture is what it feels like for its employees day in and day out to commit to working for that organization. And that's what we're talking about in terms of true, meaningful transformation. So first off, when I coach organizations how to go through significant transformation, the first thing that we talk about is what's the need that's driving this consideration for either minimal change or substantive, deep-rooted change. So why bother? Well, clearly the impetus is something's not working. Something's just not working. Your model's not working, your access to new customers, going into new markets, your strategy's just not viable. So one of the things that I work with when I conduct a change and transformation audit with my clients is how prepared are you, meaning collectively, your people, ready to embrace the road of transformation and change. So we go through a list of definitions of what needs to change. So maybe it's changing your services through a global pandemic of virtual delivery or relationship cultivation from a distance. So maybe the change is finding new funding partners, access to capital. Maybe it's new revenue opportunities, new products, new services, new customer bases, going out and reacquiring lost customers. So new revenue opportunities is one potential path to pursue. The others for academic institutions and professional training and development organizations, it's finding people who are passionate about the pursuit of lifelong learning. So these are some opportunities. So 4 principles play themselves out for organizations and individuals to go down the road of meaningful and substantive change. The first is an understanding of what exists currently inside yourself that you want to work on, and adapt to change, as well as what's in your organization, understanding what you have, what you don't have, the delta between the two, and how to transform to get yourself across that divide. The second step is the planning phase, and that's typically hands-on work that I conduct in helping the organization create an action plan. So once we develop the plan, all the vested stakeholders, all the key deliverables, the budget allocation, once the plan is firmly in place, you go to implementation stage, which is going through the process. And then fundamentally throughout every step in the process, starting from the very beginning, in terms of identifying why your organization needs to change, we go through a process of communication. So let me just say right out of the gate, no organization ever got in trouble because it communicated too much with its employees. So let's go through the plan. The plan is built upon a scope, right? It's an architected framework for what you hope to accomplish. And then the other piece is, who are the vested stakeholders? A stakeholder is just a word for an interested party, a group of individuals. So stakeholders may be internal employees, it may be at the three levels, the senior leadership team, middle management, or frontline client-facing staff. It may be the media, contractors, vendors, partners, suppliers, any and all sets of vested individuals that you're going to incorporate or are going to be touched by this change. Next up, step 3, build your change team. It should come across the organization, across the functional areas, marketing, sales, customer engagement, R&D, and it also should be top down. So it should be inclusive of the senior leadership team, certainly those people in the middle who are manager leader titles, and also, and most especially, those people who are closest to your customers, closest to the day in, day out work, flow, process, policies, procedures. In other words, your frontline staff. In fact, they should be represented on your team. So you've got the scope, you've got the identified stakeholders, you've got your team in place, and now you're creating that framework, that roadmap that's needed for success. It's all of the tasks, start to finish, that are going to be required for the implementation of the plan, for the rollout, and also the metrics, the quantifiable ways in which you're going to measure success and where you've fallen short and what you need to work on. So that's step 4, is the roadmap. 5, you need a sponsor. A sponsor is twofold. It's budget allocation, so that's the monetary investment for step 5, but a sponsor is also the champion. The champion is not necessarily that individual, whoever she or he is with or they are, with the senior most title. No, the sponsor is the person who is universally well respected, who can act and serve day in, day out as the face of this organizational transformation change plan. Who do you need to get consensus from? That's step 6. The buy-in most typically needs to come from 2 key areas that often senior leadership fails to embrace early on. Your people, your employees, contract, full-time, whoever they are, and then also your customers. Believe it or not, your customers are going to be impacted by this change transformation. So they need to be communicated with and brought into the loop and involved in the planning process. So what the first thing I'll ask in any engagement I have is, when I'm first having a conversation around what that change will look like in our work together with my clients. Step 7 is actually step 1. What do you envision success will look like? How do you define it? And that creates the swan song, almost the driven mission around this fundamental change transformation project. So I want to just share a few theoretical constructs with you. Change. The change curve, the Kübler-Ross change curve, talks about the state of having to go through periods of increasing challenge, chaos, or need for change. So we talk about inherently, this can be days, months, or most often when I'm engaged with clients, years of refusal to admit that things are transforming, changing. The floor is being pulled out from underneath you. So that denial leads to an ever cascading and increasing sense of frustration. And usually it's felt bottom up. meaning frontline staff feel it most in their day in, day out workflow. So that frustration, if unaddressed, this fundamental need for change over time leads to increasing depression, and you can monitor it, measure it, see it, feel it, touch it in your employee base until ultimately, as we've been living through in the last year of COVID-19, fundamental organic dysfunction in your informal culture such that you reach the low point according to the Kübler-Ross change curve, where something needs to change because there's this collectivist set of almost depression, debilitating. So now we're talking about typically the organization at its low point starts to address a need for change, and it identifies the need. It engages and gets all this information. It starts to create through experimentation, through talking to consultants like myself, talking to people in the organization, a planned strategy for attacking this. So the experimental phase leads to decisions being rendered about how to move forward. And then you'll see that the goal is through integrating all of this planning preparation in order to exact meaningful change. And so what you see is you've got two arrows going at play. One is you want to reduce the amount of loss that the organization incurs. You want to bring that horribly downward trending spiral. You want to push that up to minimize the impact by addressing the need to act sooner. So that's where you see the arrow kind of pushing from the right towards the left, is reduce the amount of time it takes you and your organization to respond, to get out of the state of existence where you're at risk in today's business world, and to address the need for change quicker and before the impact is most detrimental. So John Kotter talked about accelerating an 8-step process for change. I just want to talk you through what that sounds like. So the first is you need an advocate, you need a brand ambassador, you need a champion to get in there into your organization and to create a sense of urgency by communicating what you're currently dealing with is you cannot maintain it, it's insurmountable, and you need to have a fundamental shift in organizational focus. So that first trigger, according to Kotter, of creating a sense of urgency leads to building a coalition or a team within your organization that's going to take on a new vision to a new path forward, a new set of initiatives, values, all those collective things in step 3 that are needed for your army of brand advocates to advance change, to get in there and then build your army. So step 4 is creating a groundswell of support. 5, remove any and all barriers. And a lot of times, this is a relatively easy step for me to implement when I'm working with my clients because they've already hit such a threshold of visceral organizational impasse or being stuck or pain threshold that they're more willing to remove barriers. So barriers can be a whole bunch of things. It can be products offered that need to be sunset. It can be services that are no longer profitable. It can be relationships with partners, vendors, suppliers. It can be pushing money into offices or branches or divisions that aren't functioning, that don't serve the future of your organization, whatever they are. Step 5 is get those barriers out of the way. Now you want to create benchmarks, which I call wins. Those wins, according to Kotter, are opportunities to put feathers in your cap. You want to build a proverbial wind in your sails. You want to build up steam. And there's no better way to do that than to create measurable, immediate wins along the way that fulfill and sustain change, especially when you go through speed bumps, which are going to require your organization to exhibit grit or perseverance, and those wins enable you to do that. 7, the acceleration, keep your foot on the gas pedal, keep it going. And the way you keep it going is bringing in new visionary leaders into your organization, to change your hiring, to get away from technical skills that you're looking for your employees to more soft skills, things that are more needed to implementing change, critical thinking, problem solving, team building, conflict resolution, all those great soft skills. So that'll sustain your acceleration. And 8 is institute the change, get through it, and then just keep thinking fundamentally 2 key questions that lead to powerful transformation. Why? That's the first question. Why do we do this? Why are we doing it this way? And then the related second consideration that marries well with why is what if? What if we do it this way? What if that happens? So that's the thought process. So having said that, I want to talk about a change cycle. So you've got different stages that you and your organization to go through dealing with and implementing change. So the first is a sense of loss associated with what we've been dealing with over the last year. And in America, that sense of loss has led to the deaths of over 500,000 Americans. So that's what's going on societally. Now, there are things that happen, fear, caution, paralysis. That's stage one, the loss. Then we start to think about doubt. Remember the Kübler model of things are now snowballing or getting progressively worse as you go down this horrible ride or journey. Stage two is the doubt sets in. Stage three is inherent discomfort of people dealing with and trying to manage through their daily existence. Now, stage four is now we start to think things through as we start to consider and maybe move towards the light at the end of the tunnel, which is the discovery phase in stage four of anticipating and being willing to allocate resource around and being reinvigorated to this sense of we may be able to get through this. Let's start to talk about change. Stage five is an understanding that you see things progressing, and that's where you need to sustain that success in change. And then the sixth stage in the change cycle is integration. You've got a plan in place, you're in implementation mode, you're aligning your resources, things are moving forward. So just to conceptualize that where you probably are right now as an individual and as an organization is somewhere between stage 3 and 4, because that's the trigger. That's the nadir. That's the lowest point at which true meaningful change needs to be exerted. And that's probably why you're watching this webinar today. So this notion of work from afar, relationships from a distance, this whole year-long forced solitude of social distance and virtual, it means we're going to have to work collaboratively from afar. We're going to have to deal with the vagaries of the mental health and wellness of being alone, which is a most heightened sense of danger for those who are extroverts and require social interaction. So this whole new model needs to happen. So as we're working with other people, but from a distance, and that's called collaboration, how do you do that? So there are tools that are out there. But let me just talk at a meaningful level about what's required with collaboration from a distance. You need somebody, actually you need a team, but at first a brand ambassador to champion this need for revamping how your business, how your enterprise is structured, whether you're a for-profit, nonprofit, government entity. You need to think through what are the requisite needs for change so that people can work effectively together. The tools are just the how-to. Those are the tips of the trade. So the tools there are many that are out there. But at a deeper level, it's asking yourself, how do we plan to the extent that we can for those scenarios in which we hadn't anticipated? And that's the true essence of contingency planning. How do you normalize unexpected consequences? And in your business modeling, you account for these vagaries of the world that we live in and develop if-then scenarios. And literally that requires creative problem solving, which is an opportunity for you right now as we head into 2021. And as we further advance the year of hopefully a rebound, engage your people, how to put together meaningful solutions that allow you to adapt to unexpected circumstances by planning out contingencies, which are really nothing more fancy than just what if scenarios. So here's how this looks like. And I hope that you're a visual person because there's not a lot of meat on this slide, but it's intended to be instructive as a way to conceptualize contingency planning that I'm going to talk about creative problem solving through teamwork. So these options are this could happen, this has happened, this could happen, all those things that are different scenarios. And then you explain to the extent that you can what it looks like. And then as you describe what that scenario really entails, you talk about if-then statements. So if this happens then, and that's the positive of scenario one. But wait, what about the potential pitfall? or the potential adverse impact or negative aspect of that. Well, if that happens, then. And so you're doing for each scenario that you're mapping through a set of pros and cons or if-then statements. So having addressed contingency planning, I want to talk about risk management. There's this statement that we've all heard throughout our lives called blank stuff happens. That's risk management. Risk management is alleviating or reducing the potential adverse negative impact, and to the extent possible, turning life's lemons into lemonade, or turning these things that we're dealing with day in, day out in a global pandemic, turning them into opportunities. So risk management really touched about the tip of the iceberg of risk management, which is contingency planning. But what needs to happen? So the buy-in from the top is, and when I do an organizational change audit, one of the things I look at is an organization's readiness or ability to convert these challenges that appear seemingly out of nowhere, that senior leadership team's ability to fund, invest, hire people who can help adapt to their preparations for mitigating risk. And more often than not, I will look at how they, or do they, engage their employees? Do they have formal idea generation programs, like all of the best world-class organizations like Samsung, Pixar, LinkedIn, where they literally have a formal funded program to solicit ideas day in, day out from their employees at all levels of the organization and reward, recognize, monetize those ideas that employees contribute that enable the organization to introduce new products to market, develop new services, change its operational structure, service its clients more effectively, so involve everyone is another key metric I look at. Monitoring risk constantly is a way to, from an organizational perspective, have your finger on the pulse. How are you constantly monitoring when and where threat comes in? So if you think about banking and financial services, right, those are business models that exist where risk monitoring is ubiquitous, it's pervasive, right? But there are other organizations and other industries that are less adept at applying risk management and risk monitoring. So I would say this: do you have an individual who's a champion who leads a formal risk management team, and their job, part of their remit and scope in your organization, is to constantly be saying, if this happens, then what? One way is to integrate seemingly disparate functions in an organization. So if you think about a function, right, you think about what an organization does in its operations. A function is a silo: marketing, sales, finance, R&D, customer care. Those are typically the vestige or holdover from the 20th century organization, which was the old pyramid command control, with those were foundational silos or columns that may or may not have had a lot of interaction communication. So now I want to see the organizations that I coach and consult with not only bridge the divide between departments, so interdepartmental or between them. How do you integrate the projects they're working on? And the simplest way, the simplest path forward is to start to include other functional areas in your team relationship cultivation, your team meeting development. So example, how does that play out? Sales brings marketing into the fold. Customer care invites marketing and sales, a day in the life of being in their call center. So integrate all your projects and functional areas, budget for it. One way to think this through is the same team that you're funding for that idea generation program. You can also include risk management as an aspect of that. But again, you're going to hear me say the key cornerstone of implementing a truly effective risk management program as part of your business survival and change, culture change transformation, is to over communicate. There's no such thing as communicating too much. So look, this is chaos. It's chaos mitigation or chaos management. Now, those may sound like non sequiturs, two things that don't go together, but change is a positive. So chaos, in order to know it and own it, we have to define it. It's a condition or place of incredible disorder. Guess what? Or we've been living in that for the last year with COVID-19. So it's a disorderly mass, it's a jumble. So for example, chaos of papers, if you're using a definitional approach on this, disorder, confusion, any confused or disorderly collection or state of things. So that's chaos. Chaos means that your business planning goes out the window. So it's like that famous saying by Mike Tyson, all the planning goes out the window the first time you get hit in the face. So how does your organization adapt to manage, mitigate, navigate through, and also survive and thrive in the state of constantly things going astray? The best laid plans. So these things happen. But with chaos and uncertainty comes opportunity. And one of the first questions I'll ask an organization when I'm doing an audit of their ability to navigate through and adapt to change is, how prepared are you to take advantage of chaos? And that's a pretty cloudy way for me to frame it, or a little bit nebulous, but nonetheless, it's a set of conversations that I have with my clients through an exploration phase where we do a consult and I understand what's going on when things happen in the moment. Is that organization literally left with no viable option other than to react to? Is it a reactionary business existence, or is it a proactive way that they leverage uncertainty and chaotic events that seemingly come out of nowhere? Are they well funded, well prepared, well designed to adapt to and embrace chaos? So how do you adapt? It's through the planning phase. So you start by saying, we need to plan this out. We know that things are going to happen that we did not anticipate, but how are we planned aside? So let me just say something about a strategic plan. The benefit of planning is not to have a plan that you never alter, adjust, or modify. No, that would be ludicrous. Whether you're talking about your organization's plan or your own career plan, no. The point of the plan and developing the plan is it doesn't get thrown out the door as things change. The genius of the planning as an exercise, as a muscle memory or behavioral opportunity, the planning teaches us how to go through those contingency planning. If this happens, then what? So the plan itself, as a result, the plan, that document as a living, breathing entity, was going to morph or evolve constantly day in, day out anyway. The benefit of developing a plan is the lesson learned around the plan. So having said that, is your research, your preparation takes you only so far. Another aspect of planning is cultivating relationships, bringing your employees into the fold, involving them in managing through change, and also bringing your customers into your relationships. Bring your customers inside the organization. So the benefit of the plan comes from the act of doing and the process of developing almost muscle memory, as I said before, around dealing with the unexpected. So things are going to come up. Life happens, even in a business organizational setting. So the skill that's needed to adapt and adjust to these shifting priorities and demands is an incredible value add. So how do you handle objections and resistance within your organization for things like going down the road of change? You celebrate all of the wins as teams. Conversation, communication, dialogue is a constant. We know from looking at decades of research into most effective, high-performing teams that sense of constant collaborative conversation is ongoing. And individually, collectively as well, the organization learns how to look inside. And I've done other webinars on my YouTube channel on emotional intelligence, on motivating employees, but this bullet point around continuous introspection is not just individual, it's collectivist. It's as an organization. How are you constantly monitoring how you're doing? By looking inside to be prepared to move forward. And so I want to end today's webinar on a broad range of skill sets you can cultivate around creative problem solving. This is the cornerstone of true and meaningful ability to adapt to and thrive in constant chaos and uncertainty. And that's creative problem solving. So I said it before. You know that the most annoying question a little child can ask over and over and over and over and over, why? Why, as a question, is the way a child from birth to 5 years old develops and evolves, and brain strength evolves more during that phase of our life, from birth to 5 years of age, than in any other respective time frame in our lives. Why? Because we ask why constantly. And somehow society, our parents, our schools say, stop asking because I said so. Have you ever heard that in an organizational setting when you proposed a new way of doing things? Is saying, why do we do it that way? Well, because that's the way that we've always done it. That's a trigger when I'm doing organizational training and development on mastering change. That's a white flag for me, and it should be for you as well. Anytime you hear the response to why do we do it that way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. That's a sign of systemic, inbred organizational inability to adapt. And by the way, it ensures your business will die. Not if, but when. And remember I said why is just one of a two-step process. So when you ask why do we do things this way, that next question that needs to be married to why is what if? What if we tried it this way? And I want you as an individual tasked with navigating your organization out of fundamentally chaotic white waters and turbulent times to that still lush moving forward of still water. I want you to move forward by enabling all of your people and rewarding them and monetizing them and incentivizing them and recognizing them for saying, why do we do it this way and what if? So there's different strategies. The first is what we call the do it approach. So you define the problem. That's the D. The O is you open up your mind and the collective talent, skills, working together of your team to apply creative solutions. That's the do. Now the it is to identify that solution or set of solutions that resolve the problem. That's the I in it. And the T is the transformation. And I talked about this earlier. I talked about the Kübler curve and the change curve. Do it is a helpful, instructive framework around that. So brainstorming, let me just tell you, most organizations, they'll hire me to implement change by doing brainstorming. Brainstorming is outdated and you should possibly consider not doing it. But let me just say what brainstorming is. You get a group of people, a team together, usually facilitated by an outside instructor or coach, and you have them go around the table, work in a closed door setting to work on one or several problems that need to be addressed. So what happens in brainstorming, and why I encourage people not to consider using it exclusively, is that brainstorming invariably will get dominated by or veered off course by a few very influential, highly expressive, socially extroverted individuals on a team of 8 to 12. That might be 2 or 3 individuals where they dominate. And so what happens is the introverts, which by the way, research shows is 30 to 40% of the workforce, introverts tend to pull back in these social engagement settings where there's a lot of forced team-based, intra-team dynamic communication relationship and perhaps conflict. So people pull back in their shells, who are the introverts, who tend to be the people who are the most quiet and oftentimes have the most meaningful contributions they can, but often don't make fully. So instead of brainstorming, we do a strategy I implement with my clients called Brainwriting, which is where you go around a table, everybody's presented with writing implements like an index card, and you're presented with the problem or problems, and you say, how would you solve it? So each individual first, no speaking, no group-based exercises, you write down what your suggested courses of solution are. So brain writing. Then the facilitator collects every individual's index cards, and then you redistribute them so somebody else gets my solution set of solutions, and they read it, and then no talking yet, they write through, well, have you thought about this? The problem with that is, and they provide commentary, feedback, insight on those set of written down solutions. So then the facilitator collects the set of feedback that each individual gave in writing to the original set of idea solicitation. And then the facilitator will distribute it to another individual. Everybody gets a different card again. So that third pass through is an individual is now looking at that original set of solutions to this problem or problems to be addressed. They're looking at that second person's commentary, and they, as the third person, go through and they add an additional overlay of thought. And you can go through a number of permutations of this, but ultimately 3 is the most easy way to get through to gather the most non-verbalized, documented set of strategies. And then a truly effective facilitator gathers up all of that written down brain writing feedback. They put it into buckets for further conversation, discussion, breakout teams. But brain writing is a 21st century alternative to brainstorming, Whereas brainstorming can be manipulated and dominated by relatively few in a team, the brainwriting is a way to get more consensus, a more democratic participative process that truly reflects and incorporates an increased awareness that a fairly large percent of our workforce is introverted. So the Disney creative strategy is another permutation of creative problem solving. One of the geniuses going back to the 1950s of Walt Disney that ultimately led to the first animated film, Steamboat Willie in 1958, was the Disney creative approach. And Walt Disney was a master at taking his animators, his creative team, and taking them through three phases or stages of problem solving. So the first is the dreamer stage. Try applying this in your thought process to how you would re-architect your teams to come up with opportunities to change your organization and take advantage of opportunities really quickly. So what is a dreamer stage? So you present the problem or a set of situations, scenarios, to a set of teams, and they say, what if money, resource, time was not a consideration? Just dream through what would be the most audacious, creative way that you would approach solving this problem. So that's the dreamer phase, where you break out your large group into subgroups and you have them think through that first dreamer stage. Now, everybody, again, documents their big pie in the sky, no barriers, dream-based solutions. Then you get the groups back together as one or still as breakout groups, and you have each individual look at their respective partner's dreamer idea. And they say, okay, well, realistically speaking, if that happened, well, realistically, we would need to consider, well, realistically. And so they go through the second round of applying a realistic set of current marketplace dictates or considerations to that pie in the sky dreamer, no issues, first round. So that second realist immersion overlay, you then take and you have conversation, consideration, you tweak, fine tune. And then the third level that Walt Disney encouraged his animators to go through is the critic, meaning you get now this set of a dreamer-based solution or solutions with a realist's overlay. And now you, as the next person to take a look at this, considers the most critical aspects. Well, this won't work because, well, that's not going to happen because, and they really fundamentally try to tear away the fabric of this new solution that has some realistic considerations. And then so you go through this through several iterations until ultimately you come out with one or maybe more than one viable path forward, which are new approaches. So blue sky, I said before, in the Disney construct, Walt Disney called it the dreamer phase. But blue sky is what if there were no barriers, no potential pitfalls of implementing a new process, going into a new market, rolling out a new product offering, bundling separate products together. So blue sky is just a purely imaginative state of existence. It's an eyewash idea. There are no limitations. This blue sky approach is the boldest, crazy ideas you can come up with. Could you imagine building a car around a battery? Could you imagine rethinking a car? Could you imagine creating a set of commercial moon shuttles that go out of the stratosphere, that people spend millions of dollars per seat to go into to experience spaceflight, to leave orbit? Could you imagine creating a fleet of submarines that go to the deepest depths of the ocean floor? Could you imagine a superhighway underground? Those are eyewash ideas. So now I want to introduce you to what a journalist understands. It's called the starburst idea. So the starburst is the 5 W and H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. You start around the central idea or issue that your team is struggling with, and collaboratively, you do the pinwheel. You do the starburst of who's involved. What are we really talking about? How are we going to navigate from today to tomorrow? When is this likely to happen? When do we need an answer by, and why? Why is this even happening to us? And you wrap all of that conversation, collaborative work around a central idea or issue, and that's starbursting. Metaphorical thinking is putting two seemingly completely unrelated, mutually exclusive concepts together into a new solution, a new product, a new service. So think about it. Think about the phrase time is money. Time is money has no inherent ability to be put together. At least it didn't used to be, until somebody realized that if you take farmers off the farm in the late 19th century, early 1900s, you take farmers off the farm who are struggling with crops and all of that hard work and the uncertainty of bringing crops to market and living from season to season, based on the vagaries of nature, taking those farmers to the big city and offering them $5, $6 a day to work in a factory on an assembly line plant, doing the same repetitive tasks over and over again to optimize, maximize productivity. You knew that time went from an agrarian, season crop development concept to time being hourly. I'm going to pay you an hourly wage for your work. So people who were used to struggling with a mere existence now being guaranteed through employment in an organization a return on their time, money, effort, return on their work investment by being compensated. So that metaphorical thinking is taking two seemingly separate ideas and incorporating them into one solution or path forward. Another strategy I work with organizations is attribute listing. So you think about within those functional areas, what tasks they perform. And if those seemingly separate departments are now starting to be integrated or work more collaboratively on teams, interdepartmentally or between departments, think about where tasks that were seemingly handled by one department are now partnered on. And you start to just kind of build this matrix of shared task completion. Another solution is the 4P perspective. The 4P perspective sounds like this. So frame it. What's the problem of problems that we're dealing with? How do we plan our way through this? And now you're talking about all of this 4 different P's working around collaboratively a central problem or challenge. Who are the people that we need? Do we have the right people in the right place at the right time? And the potential perspective is, what's the reward on our investment? How do we turn this dangerous situation? How do we convert this threat, this risk, to an opportunity? Thinking outside the box is what today is all about, this webinar, and how do you not only embrace change, but utilize it for your organization's very survival. Well, problems cannot be solved by thinking within the framework in which they were created. Think about the clinical classical definition of insanity. Performing the same task over and over and expecting a different outcome. So the Socratic method, if you've ever been on debate or understood or watched a court trial scene or seen them on TV, you understand that the Socratic method is to take an idea, a situation, a problem, and you split up 2 teams who come at it from oppositional viewpoints. And so this is where you want to actually encourage conflict. So one group is an advocate for one solution, and they argue, or excuse me, present all the relative merits or the benefits of going down this path that you're considering doing. Now, the other group is supposed to be the cynic or the critic, and they try to tear holes in or argue through the relative dangers or where this suggested course of business transformation is going to fail. So that's both parties. Now, the Socratic method, the beauty of it, which is the basis of our legal jurisprudence system in the United States, is now the Socratic method as a teaching mechanism or training mechanism is you flip the role play. So now that group that was initially in favor of this path forward, this contingency plan, this scenario, they now become the critics. And the people who are the critics initially are now tasked with, you empower them to play the role of those people who are proponents of that intended course forward. And so what you do is, it's collaborative, it's a team build, you optimize the number of different disparate sets of oppositional viewpoint coming in, and it is one of the most powerful ways as a leader, I call it democratic or participative leadership style cultivation. So there are a few resources at your discretion that you can take advantage of. I want to leave you with a thought from Steve Jobs. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe for yourself and your organization is great work. And lastly, this state of eudaimonia, and it may seem a really impossible goal to achieve in light of a current global pandemic and what we've been dealing with, but eudaimonia, the definition of it, is the fullest and the purest expression of you in your most elevated state. Now, how do you achieve that in the state of constant chaos, uncertainty, and fear? You do that by collectively, you and your people in your organization, taking a charted path forward to achieve true and meaningful confirmation through transformation. I want to thank you so much for spending your time on this webinar on how do you deal with and embrace meaningful change. If you'd like to discuss any of these concepts or strategies, please reach out to me directly. My email is ethan@thechazingroup.com, or you can call me on my cell phone, 917-239-5571. And hey, why not check out what I have to offer your organization? Go on my website, thechazingroup.com, and be sure to look at the other videos that I posted on my YouTube channel. So thank you and good luck navigating through a course for meaningful transformation. Take care.